Welcome to the Agile Podcast. We're here again. It's New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
It's so exciting. We normally talk about your teams in software development, assuming that you're doing software development, right?
Right.
And we're assuming that your team is comprised of developers, somebody serving as a product owner, and someone serving as a Scrum Master. That is our normal basis of understanding as we kind of move through these discussions. However, I've recently entered the world where that is not so. In the world of the Silicon Valley style Agile teams, they have a product manager who serves the function of the product owner, and they have developers on the team. They almost never have a Scrum Master on the team, and whether or not they have testers, dedicated people doing testing, that is arguable. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The people that I have personally interacted with do not. So the people that I've personally interacted with have a product manager who leads a team of developers, and that is it. And those organizations are delivering software, and that's their model.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a given that you have to have those stereotypical roles, right? If you're in software development.
Yeah.
I think it depends. From my past experience working at a hospital, there were no Scrum Masters around. It was just basically the sponsor. I guess you could say he was the product owner because he was, or the product manager because he controlled the quality as well, as far as what he would accept. Yeah, so it can work a number of different ways. I don't believe these Silicon Valley companies are being avant-garde when they say we don't need a Scrum Master, because at the end of the day, what are you doing? Are you just propagating a process, or are you producing a product that somebody's going to pay for, right? Yeah. There's a need for it. And if it's the latter, which it should be if you're a profitable business, the Scrum Master is only there to quote unquote keep order because the teams aren't self-managing, self-empowered, etc. But if they are all of those things, then really what does a Scrum Master do?
You're right.
In that scenario? So yes, there are teams that can work really, really well without having that role on board. As far as the testing, again, same thing. If the team is disciplined enough where people are testing things, and you don't necessarily need a dedicated tester with that hat on, because developers test, right? They write unit code, unit testing code and all that stuff. I mean, so you don't need that necessarily, that tester. He could be, or she could be a developer, just like all the other developers, and they maybe split the role of testing, or maybe they test their own stuff and they cross-test, right? However they do that. So that's not necessarily something that should be frowned upon, I don't believe, just because everybody just learns that these are the roles in Scrum. That's just not true necessarily.
Yeah, I was going to say, when they tell me how their teams are set up, and companies like this use the word durable teams. That's the way I think that comes from the Marty Kagan stuff. But they use the word durable teams to describe the fact that these are product teams, not project teams. That's basically what they're saying when they say durable. It's just a more, I don't know, key term or whatever, specific term. But when they say that, I know what they're talking about. They're talking about this type of model. And when they say that, I often ask them, well, how are you keeping your teams up to speed? Because people come in and leave. People just leave companies. People quit, and get new jobs. You hire more people, whatever. There's going to be turnover. So are you just assuming that your teams have knowledge of Scrum? Assuming they're all using Scrum. I should have prefaced that in the intro. So are you just assuming that your teams know how to do Scrum well? Or are you doing something to, like, in the instance where you're training you're sending all of your developers to CSM training, for example. In that example, maybe you don't have dedicated Scrum Masters because everybody now is a Scrum Master. You've sent them, you tried to train them. They're coming back into a team where everybody else is also a certified Scrum Master. Everybody theoretically knows the rules. Maybe this is probably a short-sighted way of me pitching. Like, they all know what the letter of the law is, so they should be able to follow it.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, a little bandwidth there, but two ways to go about it is kind of where I'm going. Is send everybody to training so that knowledge is distributed, or you keep people in your organization who can constantly come in and train the team and keep their skills sharp, or to keep them honest, right? And that's where we go down the shared services model of keeping Agile coaches on staff. Because in all of the businesses I've interacted with, they have that model of just a product manager and just pure developers and nobody else on the team. they all have in-house agile coaches in some way, shape, or form. Now, whether they sit with the team or not is different with every company, but they all have something. It's like someone once told me, it's like Amazon's development teams they don't have testers. I was like, yeah, they don't have testers until they have a problem, and then they have a swarm of people testing things.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure they're testing things, right?
There's a difference, yeah. Don't tell me they don't have people testing things.
Right, right, absolutely. Yeah, so I think as far as having an agile coach as a shared service viable model, it's pretty common, right? And to your point about how long or how do they work with teams, it's not only unique per company, it's unique per team. If you've got a team that's brand new to working in a Scrum model or Kanban or whatever you have, that coach has got their work cut out for them, right? So they're going to stay there with the team for a while, make sure they can fly on their own for a little bit, and then they can kind of fade away, only to come back periodically to make sure that they haven't gone off the rails. On the other hand, if you've got a team that has worked in an agile way before, even though they haven't worked with each other, then it wouldn't take long for them to establish team-based practices that the team decides are good for them, not necessarily textbook practices. And then the agile coaches going back to their home in the shared services world, or to another team for that matter. I do think it's prudent, though, to come back every now and then just to see how things are going, because all too often what we see is, teams learn and then they reach, it's the sigmoid, the S curve. They learn, they get up the S curve, and then they plateau off. And if you don't come back to keep constant vigilance, that they're going to slowly start dropping, or in some cases quickly drop, because you've always got a strong personality that says, we don't need this Scrum stuff. And then when the coach is out, we're not doing this anymore, right? So they have to come back, I think, periodically, just to gauge the impact they've had and whether it's still being followed through on.
I wonder if it would make sense to assign that agile coach organizationally, like their bucket of money that you hire those agile coaches. I wonder if it makes sense to put that into your training money. You know what I mean? Put that against you. Like, this person is basically like our inside organizational trainer, and do it that way. Obviously, if you're launching a new team, like a brand, like if you decide, I got a new product, and I'm going to hire 100, like Microsoft just came out. It's like, we're hiring 100,000 engineers, whatever it is, a billion engineers, whatever, they put out a number that obviously they're not going to hit, but we're hiring 10 new engineers for this new team to do this new initiative or whatever. Well, when those engineers roll on, they're not going to hire all 10 of them at once and all start on the same day. They're going to kind of roll on, and they're going to have to learn how the organization works, basically how to work inside of the organization. And the product person is going to have their own product needs. They're going to be focused on other things. But the agile coach who's coming in to live with that team until they get spun up and start working on their own, they're only there for the team. They won't have all these other divided needs in the organization.
Correct.
So maybe that's another way to deal with it, is like it becomes a cost of spinning up a new team. It's a training budget and a cost of doing business for 3 months. I don't know what it would be to spin up a new team. Maybe that would be an easy way.
Yeah, I think to your point about spending dollars on training is valid, but I don't think you could exclusively do that, right? And say, we've trained everybody, therefore they'll continue to work in this way forever after, because people are creatures of habit and they won't. So maybe to a certain degree, it can be lightweight, depending on the, again, on the background, the experience level of the team. The coach can come in and stand up some good practices, obviously underpinned by training, right? And then they can peel off and come back sometime later just to see if there's a way that can be improved upon if they're already following the practices. But if they're not, bring them back in. So it's like the signal men, on the road, right? They say slow, stop. We should just know intuitively when there's construction going on, you should slow down. But people don't. So we've been trained to drive that way, but we don't do it.
Yeah.
So I think, you can't, I don't think you can dispense with the agile coach completely in lieu of training, but both are needed.
You have to kind of look at what you're spending on training organizationally. Depends on how big your organization is as well. But there's got to be a number for critical mass. A minimum, if not to pull ahead significantly, a minimum number of training dollars that it takes to keep everyone sharp. I had a CEO one time who loved the analogy of sharpening the axe. He's like, we got to continually be sharpening the axe. You know, I can make the same argument for needing to bring somebody in to keep our process skills sharp. I can make the same argument for bringing somebody in to make sure we're up on the latest DevOps practices or up on the latest whatever technologies, whatever it is. If somebody's job in the organization basically was to make sure we're bringing those skills in.
Yeah, and I think this is going to segue into this whole budgeting subject, because oftentimes training dollars don't come out of the mainstream budget.
You're right.
So I think depending on your organization and how they budget, it could work well or not so well.
Yeah. Well, it should be a subset of the product to say, basically if my product, I'm just throwing a number out of the air. If my product takes $100,000 per month to maintain, then 10% of that, 5% of that, I don't know, pick your number out of the air, right, is spent making sure that the people development is continually going on. If you don't put $1 to people development, is it happening?
No. So this is analogous to, let's say you have a project that requires a certain hardware, right? Certain level of hardware. And you have to keep that up over time. You have to update and refresh your hardware.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, there's consequences to the product and the whole user experience. This is no different in my book, right? If you're not keeping, to use your ex-boss's analogy, I guess, keeping the axe sharp, that's going to have an impact.
Yeah.
Right? And that impact, it's either going to be seen right away or it's going to be seen pretty soon, because that idea of not following good practices, I guess a different way of saying following bad practices maybe, it's also contagious. So people want to take the easy way out.
Oh, yeah.
So why should I do all these things when I can just get by doing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Right? People don't write things down because and we know what we're doing. It's up here.
Yeah.
Right? And then you lose that person for whatever reason. They hit the lotto.
Yeah.
And now you're in trouble. But so somebody has to continuously, I think, work on that side of it. And it's an organizational responsibility from the very top to say we're going to dedicate the funding needed to do that. Otherwise, somebody will eat your lunch.
Yeah, I don't like that. This is I think we got to put a pin in this topic, because I would like to explore if there is a financial way or some other metric way of identifying like we're not spending enough time training people.
Yeah, there are a few things I've seen out there, like cost of doing business. They look at the opportunity cost of losing the business. That's one way of looking at it, and what it takes to keep it going, and that includes training. But as I said, keeping your hardware current and all of those sorts of things. Training here, when we talk about that, we're not just talking about the dev team, etc. We're talking about training everybody that is behind the product.
Yeah.
That includes people on the phones when they're receiving calls for product support. It includes people that are responding to chat, for instance, right? If you have live chat response. And so it's the full gamut. Yeah, we can certainly revisit this at some point.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to spin this off into a whole podcast of its own, because the other thing that I would like to dig into, I don't know if it's a finance discussion. I'm not 100% certain what type of discussion it is, but I would also like, it doesn't have to be real drawn out. It could be a quick and dirty, but a way of calculating what is the cost of not doing something. Like I brought up one time, how do you know whether to build a brand new feature in a brand new direction, or to just keep expanding your current features of things that people are already paying for, people are already asking for? Like, how do you know? The real answer is you kind of feel it out, and you kind of decide what people are using. You see how much bandwidth that you have to break off a percentage and do some work over here, and kind of do them. You try to do them at the same time, right? That's the real answer. But I would like to know, like, how do you analyze the opportunities that you pass up? Testing is a perfect example of this. Like, we're not going to do regression every single release. We're going to do regression every 3 releases, because I can't have my QA people tied up and do whatever. I can't spend this much time with I'm afraid of interfacing with my users. That's a business thing. It's like, I'm afraid of disrupting my end users and asking them to keep doing this laborious testing or keep doing this beta. A lot of people do that, but beta testing, they don't want to bother. They try to separate the groups of beta testers or alpha testers or whatever into separate groups, so they don't have to keep going back to the same people and keep bothering them over and over. They feel like they're annoying them or whatever. I kind of feel like anyone doing alpha, beta, whatever type of testing for you is they're early adopters anyway, and they love new stuff.
They do.
So you really should kind of get over the fear of bothering those guys. They kind of volunteered for it. But the point is some kind of metric to help you say, if we choose not to do this, here's what the cost likely will be. And then you can make business decisions whether to skip that or not.
Yeah, I just want to touch upon, this idea of bothering the user community. So a company I worked for quite a few years ago now, a small company, very small company. The clients were household names, actually, pretty big. And the way they handled this was there was obviously competition. They're building all these great features. And yet the little company, this little software house, was having great success. And the reason was they listened to their customers. And here's what they did. They formed a user group, right? And they had representation from every customer in the user group. And it grew over a couple of years to the point where the user group registered themselves as a corporation. So then they would get together once a year, usually in a nice location, partially funded by the company, but partially funded by various customers, right? They would pitch in money as well, send their own people, stuff like that. The company would just pay for the venue. But the deal they made with the company was this. The user group, once they incorporated themselves, said, we'll go there, wherever there is, for 2 days, but we don't want you there.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want to hear about sales pitches and stuff on the new stuff you're bringing out. What we want to do is work with each other.
Yeah.
Right? So we're like, okay, well, how does that help the company?
Mm-hmm.
So a quid pro quo here. The company said, okay, well, here's what we'll do. 2 days. So first day, we will not show up. We'll only show up the second day. Mm-hmm. But in return, what you'll do is this. When you guys work together, you all collectively, as all the users, come up with a list of top 10 things that you want us to focus on for the next quarter. And that was really powerful because they then argued amongst themselves about what is important. And the top 10 list came out. The next day we went in, looked at all those, and we addressed those. Not necessarily address, but acknowledge what they are and just give a gut feel whether we're going to do it, not do it, when we might do it, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last hour of the second day, when pretty much everybody's tired, that's when the company said, by the way, we've been thinking about doing these other things. What do you think? Yeah. It worked really well. So it wasn't a bother. People really liked to see the new things because they knew that we listened to them to begin with. So if you're doing that, right, then it should not be a bother. They would be all too eager, to your point, to come forward because they experience the pains in the current system. Yeah. And if you're building to those pains, how can you go wrong?
Yeah. I mean, it depends who facilitates those types of sessions.
It's the user group.
Yeah.
So when the vendor's not even there, which is fantastic. Yeah. I forget how they actually did that. I think they elected somebody every year as the kind of the spokesperson, but he was just a facilitator, or she, right? They would get together and discuss these things. Yeah. But yeah, it worked really well.
To pivot back to our Agile coaches, in the Agile coach as a shared service, the Agile coach is like trainers, and I don't like to think of it as trainers. Trainers means that like they're coming in and they're doing a presentation at the team, and that's not what I find useful. They come in with new teams, or when teams have had air quotes significant churn. Yep. To basically sit with and help the team learn and train back up to reach a certain level of proficiency. Because my thinking is these people are also as expert as you can be with the Tuckman model, storming, forming, et cetera, to help them get through those phases, kind of shepherd them through those phases, do team building stuff like that. But why I'm hesitant to suggest the Agile coach as a shared service model is because I see other pieces of the organization, the more technically bent side of the organization, attempt to do the same thing with other disciplines as shared services, but what they end up doing is they end up recreating waterfall in this methodology. Now, it doesn't really work recreating waterfall when you're doing like Agile coaches, because they're not really producing requirements, or they're not really affecting the chain that came up before them. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. A company has individual Scrum teams. Let's even say those individual Scrum teams have their own Scrum Master, their own PO, their own developers, right? And the company has this whole army of Scrum teams, 12, 15, 20 Scrum teams. but the company has a shared pool of architects. And the architect will come in when the PO or program manager or portfolio manager, somebody like that, is come up with a concept for a solution. And the architect will say, solution's got to do X and Y and Z, and it's got to work like this, and it's got to interface with this database, it's got to pull from here, refresh with whatever. And basically, they'll hand down to your Scrum teams or teams, right, however it works, they'll hand down a group of requirements. Requirements in this instance meaning things that have already been decided and that have happened in the event sequence before the team got involved, and now the team has to basically take that as scripture, and you know, they don't really get to question any of that. They have, you know, so like shared services from that perspective is how I've seen a lot of shared services implemented, which is not the way that I'm talking about, you know.
Right.
But I could apply that to designers, architects, UI UX guys, DevOps, release engineering. Like I've seen all of that kind of stuff played off as waterfall inside of the guise of Agile.
I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, all of those areas are where you see shared services being injected into teams, right? So when you look at where are some of the major issues that teams have encountered in the past, it aligns itself squarely with those areas.
Yeah, right.
And that's because maybe they didn't get the right quality, or they didn't get the right quantity, or both, right? Because shared services, there's an internal to the organization, there's an internal contract. There's a cross charge to some other department for these people's time. Yeah. And that works against the principle of trying to improve the teams. Because let's face it, the motivation for the coach is, or their management is, get in, get out as fast as you can because we need you over here.
Right, yeah.
Right? And the worst case scenario I've seen is shared services coach or UI UX person or, whatever, right? Designer, etc., architect. They're working on multiple projects, multiple teams, and they're spread thin everywhere. Yeah. Out of all of those roles, UX and the Agile coach are roles that you really cannot focus on more than one team at a time. It's hard. Yeah. It's hard to do that without sacrificing quality.
Yeah. Well, what they'll try to do is they'll say, well, you're 66% with this. The majority of your time was with this team, and you're although you're spending that with the other team, they really shouldn't need your time. We're going to do like 30% of your time with the other. Or maybe it's 75%, 25%. Basically, what you'll do is you'll work a lot with one team, and then you'll come off of that project as they move into the next phase of the waterfall, and they theoretically don't need you anymore. But when questions come up, you have to come in and answer questions. So again, it's waterfall development. It's exactly what waterfall development is.
Yep.
In the testing phase, the development efforts should be completed. But if testing finds a bug, you have to get those developers who may have gone on to another project, and you have to come back over and fix their code or do an enhancement or whatever and spend a little more time, and then they can go back to their other project. So it's company claiming that they're agile at that point. But, again, if you peek under the covers just a tiny, tiny bit, it's like, it's waterfall.
Yeah, it's Agile Scrum Fall.
Yeah. So now that I'm done with the bashing part of this discussion, let me rework the model that I just pitched for Agile coaches, which is when you spin a new team up or do whatever, Agile coaches come in for a while, to also work for designers or architects. Maybe when you spin up a new team, those people come in for a while too. Now, the trade-off there would be it's going to get very expensive front-loading your team for the first couple months with, with like a designer and an architect. Usually companies run into this problem because architects, UI UX people, or DevOps engineers or release engineers or whatever you want to call them are extremely expensive compared to the plain old air quotes plain old developer. Even though I would completely argue like a full stack developer will likely have a lot of those cross skills with a lot of those other so like take that off the table for a second, because there are still specialist skills like a DBA, for example. It will have a lot deeper knowledge about how to structure your database, what data to index, that kind of stuff. What big database strategies to go for to get the best performance that maybe a full stack developer even wouldn't have. So there is still something to be said for the shared service model, where your organization has a few of these very high powered people floating around. But again, I'm not sure that I've ever hit on the best way. I'm trying to think of an organization that I've been at that has employed them in a very effective way in a shared services model?
I think the experience ranges across the spectrum, probably. I think one of the difficulties is because of the shared services model being so self-limiting, right, in the way we just described, what it tends to precipitate is this idea that, I'll just use Agile coaches as an example, because they're not there whenever the team goes into dysfunction. At that point is the best point to correct, right? They're not there. So the team continues to dive deeper and deeper into dysfunction. So by the time the Agile coach comes around, they're so far gone that all they can do is simply come in and do more training. And before they observe them getting back up to where they were, they're gone again.
Yeah.
And so as a net result of all of that, the team is more, to your point earlier, doing waterfall within a sprint. And they get numb to the idea after a while. I mean, even some of the coaches do. They just say, we've tried, we keep trying, they just won't listen, that kind of thing. So I think the whole thing is self-limiting because of this whole shared services model. So maybe we can talk about a couple of the alternates to this, right? I think there's a lot to be said for spreading the teams around. And I know people out there watching and listening would be going, what do you mean? We're supposed to keep the teams together.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. However, think about this. The teams stay together, but a developer is a developer. If they're working in an environment where they're following good, sound, agile practices, there's nothing wrong with taking a developer with those skills into another team, but they are working in an agile way to help this situation I just outlined, right, where the coach is not there the whole time. Well, these developers could be the people that speak up and say, we should be sizing things together, not in silos, those kinds of things. Yeah. I think it can work really well if done right.
Yeah. I don't think there's that many of these specific roles on the teams. We hit designers / UI UX, architects. When I think architect, I also think of like senior engineers or DBAs, people like that. And then DevOps / release engineers. You could also throw in on top of that test engineers, stuff like that. People who have automation.
Performance testers maybe.
Performance, that kind of. The point of me saying this is, if the people that are in your organization are using their time on the teams to impart the knowledge that they have onto the team members, then they could be floating from team to team, helping people learn those skills and leaving that, kind of like we do, what we always talk about with BAs, where the BA should be rock starring into the team, help them learn how to discover things, leaving those skills in the team when they bounce out to go somewhere else. You could add a BA to this list as well.
Sure.
For the purposes of normal Agile teams, especially like the Silicon Valley, like I was just talking about, like they don't have BAs in those type of organizations. However, they certainly have the skills that BAs have kind of distributed. If I was going to suggest something, if you're going to have specialty people in these positions, then I wouldn't dedicate them more than 50-50. I wouldn't load them with more than 2 teams.
I agree. Absolutely. Yeah. And you said this earlier, they maybe work 60% on one project and 40 on another, but in real life it's 65 on that one and 65 on this one, and it tends to squeeze and burn people out.
Even with 50-50, you still potentially will be put in a position where you're working more than any one person on any one team.
Absolutely.
But the idea is, again, these people usually command higher salaries than most people. They're usually way more senior than most people on teams, and they're usually kind of okay. They kind of have the same attitude that I have, where it's like, if you're burning me at both ends, I'm kind of okay with it as long as you're not burning all the team members. I kind of signed up for this, whereas, otherwise you can turn around and burn 15, 16, 18 people,
Yeah, for sure.
That's my summation of this category. I don't know.
Was that one sticky or no? Just kidding.
Nah, that was both these.
What do we leave untouched? Is there anything there? We were
talking about like the Silicon Valley model I was talking about, where you have one product manager and they have the team to themselves is mainly just developers. They don't have a Scrum Master. Like maybe the organization has an Agile coach or not. The reason I brought that up is because usually in that model, it is that product manager only has that one team. Like that is something that those companies, they don't really publicize that either. Now I'm thinking about it. I haven't really heard that a lot. Like, there's a lot about Scrum Masters jumping from team to team, and in organizations where Scrum Masters have 3, 4, 5, 6 teams, whatever.
Yeah.
Product owners also have a heavy load of 3, 4, 5 teams or whatever. But in the position where it's just a product manager and they just have developers with them, in the organizations that I've been talking to, it's just one product manager and their developers on that one team, and that's it. They don't span teams. They don't do any of this. They don't play any of these tap dance games.
That sounds incredible to me, just because I see that as a much leaner, much more efficient way to work. So you've got somebody who has skin in the game, also the ability to make decisions, right? And they're working closely without intermediaries to kind of mess things up. They're working closely with the team. Mm-hmm. So you've got the what and the how working closely together.
Right.
What's not to like?
Yeah, and then we were talking about before we started, I see organizations that as they grow and they hire extra product owners, they all kind of report up to what I would think is like a director of product. But in actuality, that person has the title of like a product manager. There's other like group product managers. There's other titles for this too. But what it ends up being is they end up breaking the delivery work, meaning software delivery, sitting with the teams, answering the questions that the team has and stuff like that, and kind of deciding the on the ground what we're going to develop and how we're going to do it. More how we're going to do it, quite honestly.
Yeah.
They end up breaking that work apart from the discovery work of talking to the customers, bringing work in, and kind of setting the higher priorities. They break that work apart. And again, the Marty Kagan book that I just reread it like very recently, his opinion on this is you should never break those two roles apart, because the minute that you divide discovery from delivery from one person, now you've created a disconnect. Basically, now you're now lending yourself back to waterfall.
Yeah, and I personally agree with that. I think that's exactly what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. So I agree with it. If you don't split the role, then what happens? Are you overloading that person? That's the other thing to, the product manager, how many products or product lines a product manager can handle realistically, especially if they're working directly with the team, where they're going to have to divvy their time up between the team plus the customer-facing strategic stuff, discovery. So I think as long as there are guardrails around that, I think it can work well. After
going down this road and kind of thinking about the organizations that I've been a part of, where they've used that model, like somebody higher up, usually in the leadership or a higher level, basically, in charge of the discovery work. In reality, in disguise, that's how the teams become feature.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the executive basically says, or whatever, leadership, they basically say, well, I know the customers and I know what they want. And they try to push the teams away from talking to the customers under the banner of it's just a waste of your time and you're going to spend all this extra time. And quite honestly, we pitch it like it sounds crazy, but in reality, the developers on your team usually are saying like, I don't want to be in front of customers. Like, an unstructured conversation in front of customers. That's not my job. My job is to go sit in a dark room and, smash angrily into a keyboard and,
Yeah. I mean, a lot of developers don't like dealing directly with customers. I don't know why, but they find it intimidating. But on the other hand, if they are working directly with the customers, that's where the innovation comes in. They can ask these questions. They can listen to something the customer says and really internalize that, take it back. The granularity at which this conversation happens often isn't there when you have a product manager who's got lots of other stuff to do, and so they're basically just doing high-level conversations. They're engaging in maybe presentations and things like that, and not having a detailed discussion to kind of understand the deep rationale behind those pain points that the customers have.
Yeah.
So I think there's value in having the developers speak directly with the customers.
So talking to customers, that's when you're doing your discovery work, right? You're talking to customers, find out what they need, find out whether they value the solution, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. Exercising those BA skills that I was also talking about. But when you're doing that, if your designer is there in the room, they could be changing stuff around maybe as you're kind of talking about it. Or they could be mocking stuff up or even writing on a whiteboard. I've sat in front of customers with a whiteboard and kind of sketched things out before. Or marked up at this is real old school, but marked up a printout of like, we like this, we don't like this, put them side by side. You would think it is like A/B tests is what you would think of this. The modern equivalent. This is back in the day. So and then having your developer in the room as well, because again, the developers, they're essentially some of the smartest people in the building. So why would you not bring the smartest people in the building?
Right.
Even if they sit there and don't say anything, they still are taking insights from the conversation about something they're going to work on or did work on. So I don't know why you would leave those people out. I don't know why you would leave those people out, but I do know why you would leave those people out. I should have said, I feel it's criminal that they leave those people out, but they leave those people out in pursuit of efficiency, to say, well, we don't want to have a meeting with X number of people. Look at all this time we're wasting.
Right.
That's what they'll say. But in reality, it saves you a bunch of time on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pay me now or pay me later, right? So pay me now or pay me a lot later. That's basically what this boils down to.
Yeah. If you're going to leave the developer, designer, tester, whoever, if you're going to leave all those people out for when you talk to the customer, you're basically doing all the requirements in one phase, and now you're doing the development in another phase. Even if you have a great team and a great agile process, I still see organizations that they do all the design work, or maybe they have an architect that sits separate, and the architect and the salesperson or whoever, or maybe the product manager is different than the product owner. I was in an organization where the product manager and the product owner were different people, and the product manager and the architect, who was like a senior software developer, but they sat outside of the teams. They were like a leadership level software developer, right?
Yeah.
And those two people, the product manager and the senior software architect, would go out to customers, get requirements, basically do discovery work with customers, and they'd bring it back and they'd write like an initial product discovery document, and they'd send that to the engineering team, and they would be available for questions, and the engineering team would have to basically decipher this requirements document that again, that they would take as scripture, that they can't basically question anything, any of the assumptions that were built in, and they never talked to the customer. Even when they delivered the software, they never went back and talked to the customer. It was on these, air quotes, higher ups. And in that instance, the team itself had a PO, had a dedicated Scrum Master, had good Scrum practices, were humming along. They could hit their delivery numbers every sprint. You know what I mean? They could hit their flow numbers, were pretty stable every sprint. Mm-hmm. But by the time the waterfall got to the agile process, it was too late. Like like the agile process should have been expanded to include all that stuff, because a team could have handled it. Maybe that would be a recommendation in that scenario, is just say, listen, here's what we've seen that works well. Mm-hmm. You're basically heading toward a waterfall. You go straight down Niagara Falls. Yeah. It was like, here's our agile bubble in this waterfall. Yeah. That's exactly what it was. That's not going to stay dry for long. Yeah. Well, that's why I brought up before I brought up this category in a previous podcast. I don't remember how I brought it up, but I remember I brought it up, and then I kind of quickly backed off of really exploring it because it wasn't the right conversation. I think this is probably a lot closer to the conversation. Our company's leaning on product people and just calling them product managers, and then replacing program managers and project managers and Scrum Masters and potentially people managers, or potentially higher level up tactical level leadership, CTOs, managers development, directors development. Yep. Are they just kind of like throwing all that stuff on product, where now product is getting super diluted? Somebody brought up the term, I think it was in the Marty Kagan book actually, agile coach, but they were like, what it really is an agile delivery coach, because a lot of people who come up into the role of agile coach, they really don't have serious experience in discovery. Mm-hmm. So there's like a agile discovery coach position, which is a completely separate thing. I never heard of that. I was like, well, I've never met a discovery coach ever. No. I mean, most coaches should be able to coach up to the product level, right? If they're any good. Yeah. But I've never heard of a dedicated role like that. Yeah, a dedicated role to doing discovery. Like, yeah. I've seen some companies have little pockets within the organization, like innovation centers and innovation labs and things like that, mm-hmm. where people are given a little bit more leeway to experiment and things like that, but not necessarily involving customers. It's more internal,
right? Trying to invent the next best thing, and then they'll take it to the customer, which always seems to me back to front.
Yeah. I just read a book recently called Scrum. It's about the Google Ventures team that goes out and partners with apparently Google. I think Google invests money in startups. I think that's what they do. And then they send this ventures team out to the startups to do a 1 week, cancel all your meetings, come into a room together with the Google venture team, and then they go through the discovery process and they deliver something at the end of the week. Basically, they go through the discovery process a couple days, the building is a couple days, and then the Friday is demo day, basically. Yeah. Sprint, solve big problems and test new ideas in just 5 days. Jake Knapp. Anyway, the reason I brought that up is because I'm like, man, there's a lot of stuff getting thrown on product people. Like the delivery function now is being thrown on product people. Although you may have agile coaches or delivery managers in your organization.
Or delivery coaches.
Yeah, whatever. You may have those people in your organization, but the program manager is full-time with your team. So they're living in it. Regardless if you have help or not, you've got a program manager. So even if your delivery process stinks,
right?
And is full of outdated ideas or is actually waterfall up to the bubble where agile comes in, but you may not have any of these people. So I kind of also feel there's this nebulous, I'm not sure of type of feeling of like the organization is just throwing all things software related onto this one person. Yeah.
So the new product manager with all these responsibilities other than product, right? Kind of remind me of the old days of project manager, where the project manager was a general dog's body responsible for everything.
Yeah.
Whatever it was, it's the project manager's job.
Yeah.
Because it's part of the project, but then ultimately everything is.
Yeah. That's the one thing that I got asked every time I interviewed for a product manager. They'll ask you, what's your strategy for dealing with technical debt? They'll always ask that question.
Yeah.
And I always ask questions before I give an answer, because I'm like, am I dealing with just a general percentage of hammering down technical debt to get us ahead and establish some kind of architectural runway? Or am I dealing with a backlog of crippling technical debt? Like, which one are we talking about here?
You absolutely have to ascertain where you stand with it, because some tech debt you have to deal with no matter what. And others, you could say, yeah, it's there, we'll live with it. Whenever we do another version, maybe we'll take care of it then, because the price just isn't worth paying right now. So yeah, you have to know.
Yeah, I had this discussion very recently with someone. I was like, well, it also depends on what your categorization of technical debt is, because if let's say we're building mobile applications for Android, iOS, who is the person in the organization that's keeping track of all the different versions and all the different releases, security patches, whatever, for all the operating systems that we're built on? Are you putting that on the product manager, or is there like a development centric person with a line on all the technological things that interface with our project, that a constant feed, and they have to interface with the product manager to say, hey, we're putting out this version. Here's our strategy for, hopefully you have some kind of automation strategy in place where it's not a big deal or a big surprise. This is the other reason it brought it up. Anyone who's on the AWS product has to deal with AWS basically outdating your environments every 6 months to be like, we're not going to patch that environment anymore because it's too old. And be like, too old? I just spun this up 6 months ago, man.
Yeah. It's planned obsolescence. You've got to upgrade.
Yeah. But I mean, like the product manager is going to be going through reading every single tiny little change to AWS. But I mean, that's the point of, like, if you're not going to have a development manager, a CTO, some kind of technology manager or something who works in parallel with your product manager to kind of alert them of maybe it's the product manager's job to prioritize these things, to bring them into their development cycle. You could make an argument that a good team would be ahead of this stuff. But that's why a company has a CTO or sometimes operations is handles technology. Depending on the size of the company, but there should be some kind of peer with the product manager.
There should be, but I haven't found many companies that have that role.
Well, I'm glad this conversation came to a logical cliff, and then just like Wile E. Coyote just ended up in the middle of the air looking around and go right down the cliff. Yeah, that's so weird because so many organizations have people in that role, but these are not specifically delineated things that are in their responsibility of your job as the chief technology officer is to have a line on all the technology that we are using and could potentially use, and then to be the driving force to bring that stuff in and push us forward.
Yep.
Kind of everything we've been talking about, product managers, how they operate with this team of developers, maybe or may not have a scrum master, maybe or maybe not have other people on a team that are shared. I guess we should stop for a second and explore the idea of this model, but outside of specifically a software development shop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is where we're increasingly starting to see agile practices, Scrum being adopted for non-software projects, right? I think as far as the model goes, not a lot changes in my view, because with software development, the product is the software, right? The product changes, but the needs are still the same. You've got to listen to the customers. You've got to respond to their needs quickly. And you've got to deliver in a way that's repeatable, right? All of that doesn't change regardless of what you're trying to produce.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is the reason that they're not developers in the Scrum document, Scrum Guide anymore. They're just Scrum team members. The product owner / product manager in this iteration, and then the Scrum team members, just trying to take terminology out of it so they're not software developers. Because in the setup that we're talking about, the Silicon Valley style setup that we started with, you have the product manager and you have developers on that team, and then you don't have anyone else. But the developers are producing software, but the developers could be literally producing almost anything else, and the model would still hold up, regardless if you're in software development or in marketing, whatever, construction, I guess, theoretically, you could do it.
I think the word developer is a little bit unfortunate here, because historically it's used for software development. But, I was explaining to people that according to the latest Scrum Guide, the word developer just means people doing the work, developing the work, taking the work forward, right? And so that could be anybody.
Yeah.
I think we need to also be cognizant that this is true of products that are being built as opposed to repetitive things that are being done like in operations, right? That's a different model there. Yeah. Because you don't necessarily have to listen to your customers the whole time. You're just keeping an environment up. You're keeping the level of service you've got up. And the SLAs come into play, sure, right? But it's not developing something new, heretofore unknown, basically, that has risk and complexity and all of that.
Yeah.
So, for those kinds of models, maybe there could be a slightly different way of working rather than in software or other development models.
Yeah. They would still have a product person in those models.
Absolutely.
I would think, I'm thinking of other departments. I'm thinking of like a sales department. They're all kind of working collaboratively to sell a customer. You know what I mean? I could see them Monday through Friday being their length of their sprint, for example. You know what I mean? Monday morning they get together. Monday morning sales call, right? They get together, decide these are our prospects. Nobody wants to answer a cold call on Monday morning, so that they should be planning what they're doing Monday morning, right? But Monday morning sales call, they get together, talk about their prospects, talk about look at the data, maybe call some people in or whatever to talk, and then hit the ground running a little later that day with their real research, real numbers, whatever, with a plan of action. And then every day they can adjust that plan of action until Friday they decide, again, who's going to answer the phone Friday afternoon for a sales call or whatever.
Right.
Probably not going to happen. So, but Friday afternoon they can do their analysis, what went well this week.
And look back. And
what did we sell? What didn't we sell? They can look at hard metrics if they want. So sales team makes a lot of sense. I could also argue it makes a lot of sense for them to be Kanban as well. But look, Scrum makes sense too, because the collaborative thing, if all the salespeople are on salary, and they truly don't have a reason to compete against each other, or they have a reason to be collaborative and work together, it makes a lot of sense. In my brain, when we were talking about it, I was thinking about a support department of you know that you're going to have general coverage of the phone, so that people in the support department could talk amongst themselves and decide who, I need 3 people to be on the phone and 2 people to be investigating customer issues, assuming everyone has the same skill set. Actually, it's better if they don't have the same skill set, because then you guys talk to each other and figure it out, and whoever's your supervisor or manager of the support department probably knows the product well enough to determine these are the things we should be putting extra time into, and so that lends itself. I probably could bend this to marketing is super easy for me as well. Like a lot of people use that because it's very easily understandable. I'm trying to think of other departments where it's not as understandable. Recruiting could be.
Recruiting, though, with recruiting, there's still that element of competition, just like salespeople, right? There are other areas like HR, for instance, where you don't have that competition necessarily, right? You could still adopt good agile practices, and maybe Kanban makes sense there in most cases, but you can still adopt those practices where you're inspecting your process every now and then. You're figuring out what the next things are that you need to be going toward. So yeah, it can work.
See, I've started thinking about HR. I don't know if I'll leave this in. I started thinking about HR and finance as well. I started thinking of them as like a circle that runs in parallel next to, above? I don't want to say above. A circle that runs in parallel with the teams that they support, and kind of like a Venn diagram. This team runs here, this team runs here, and the HR kind of intersects all the teams. And I don't know, an HR person probably can service more than 2 teams. I don't know what the number that, one HR person to handle all your finance and all of your people coming in and out of the teams,
onboarding and offboarding, all of those things.
But dealing with whatever other matters have to do with dealing with people, they probably can handle more than 2 teams. They could probably handle a couple teams. I don't know what the number. There's probably some kind of number of total employees handled by one HR person that companies come up with for numbers, and that probably scales pretty easily. I mean, I don't know what that. I would not imagine that number to be more than 30 people to one HR rep. Like I would think once you get past 30 people, maybe 20 people, maybe as high as 40 people, you probably need a full-time HR person. I don't know, maybe not. But the HR's job duties as a representative of the leadership team, basically driving dictates down through the organization, that's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
That's a separate job. That's a separate job of somebody who represents the leadership, and that is its own circle.
Yeah.
And that circle interacts with all the rest of the circles through all the individual HR people that are in the separate grouping of HR.
Yeah. So one's more discipline. Of an organizational level policy making engine, really, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the HR people that only service that team. Now you don't have to have HR blasting policy down to the entire organization.
Right.
The HR rep on your teams could be coming to your teams and just addressing 20, 30 people, get them together and be like, hey, these are the new things that are going into effect at HR, or these are the things that our company's trying to avoid legally, or what. I don't know what HR people do all day.
If you're an HR person, let us know. We'd love to have you on.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Yeah, if you're like HR, finance, I have crazy ideas. I would specifically like a finance person to come on, because I would like to work through the idea of some kind of formula to figure out the cost of not doing something or passing on an opportunity. I'm certain businesses have a cost of passing on an opportunity. Like I can't think of sales departments not having that number of when we willingly decide to abandon a sale or not go after a sale.
Yep.
What's the opportunity that we're missing? So I'd like to see what those numbers are, how they work, kind of work through them here. Maybe that'd be valuable for someone. It'd certainly be valuable for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love that. So yeah, if you're in any of those roles, please reach out.
There's a few little things we could talk about with this one, breaking out software development, basically expanding that bubble of where agility lives once you get it really going, and then expanding that bubble to now you include your architect, and they are part of the team. And if you can't permanently have them part of the team, then work out something where they just pick like 2 team members and bring them with them every time they do discovery. You know what I mean? So that the team is involved. Like 2 team members is better than 0 team members.
Sure.
I would prefer they just send the invite and be like, anyone who's interested. At larger organizations I've been at with product people who are very far divorced from the day-to-day of the software development, they are very standoffish about bringing your typical developer from any one of the teams to a meeting with one of, air quotes, their customers. They're like, oh, what is this person going to say?
Right.
They might start talking, and they don't have that polished finish.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I cringe hearing those kind of discussions, but like if I had a nickel for every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I like the idea of the architect taking one or two team members. In practice, often we have these roles. The tech lead would be the stand-in, right, for the architect. But oftentimes the tech lead isn't really empowered necessarily.
Right.
They're not TOGAF certified or anything like that. But they, the point here isn't really about their technical ability. It's about interfacing with customers and listening to what they're saying. So I like that idea that they always take somebody, and it doesn't have to be the same person every time. Mm-hmm. Ideally, anybody who wants to join can join. Yeah. And lead the team to be more self-managing.
Yeah, like an example of this, it was software development, but it also sort of wasn't software development. It depends on whether I'm going to trigger some people right now. It depends on whether you consider the building of visualizations like Tableau or Power BI dashboards as software development. Like a lot of development teams do not consider that software development because you're just loading data and it's like whenever I talk about building web pages back when I was a strictly crappy developer, it would take me like a couple hours to build a web page and get all the details I want on it and get it responding the way I want, and then it would take 2 days to do the CSS and get it exactly the way I want it. It's like that kind of work,
2 days if you don't have OCD. Oh my goodness. I remember those days.
Yeah. Example that kind of highlights that bubble inside of the waterfall. I was building a data platform with a team at a large firm, and the data platform teams, we kind of went back and forth with the product management, that divorced level product management that I was talking about, because their concept was, well, I'll tell you my concept first. My concept was we are consuming data from various data sources around the internet, around the firm, whatever. So like maybe consume some data from out of the Salesforce system, consume some data out of their billing system, their financial accounting system, whatever. Kind of smash the two together and give you an outlook on potential contracts, how much money we made off of different content, how much we build versus how much we how much is coming in, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And basically the idea was we had engineers who would consume the data and flatten it and make it available in data sources. I'm not going to get into super details, but that's what it is. You publish data sources, and then people can connect to those data sources and build visualizations, basically build dashboards or build widgets that can be consumed in the dashboards. So we had engineers who consumed the data and flattened it, and then we had visualization people who built dashboards.
Made the data look pretty.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we also had data analysts who were sort of like a subject matter expert / business analyst / product owner.
Yeah.
But they had deep domain expertise. So they're in the product owner role in this organization, right? I remember going back and forth with the air quotes leadership at that organization, because when I came in, I split the teams up and I was like, I want a couple of engineers, because consuming and flattening the data takes a lot of time. Because you have to learn new schemas, you have to figure out how to consume it, you have to figure out where to put it and how to load it quickly. Because you're talking about terabytes of data, potentially you're parsing through and loading. And when you get to building visualizations, that goes fairly quick.
Well, sure.
And it's a lot of back and forth with the user. So the idea is figuring out what data to pull. So you're not pulling the whole world.
Everything, right?
Enough to start building your visualizations and then prioritizing the right thing. And then again, you have subject matter experts on the team who know the data already. So you're shortcutting that, right? So it's fantastic. So I was like, I need about 2 engineers, maybe 3 if the data sets are big that we're dealing with. I need a analyst who knows the data and is also the product owner that do prioritization. And I need a person who's doing the visualizations so we can do all this activity at the same time.
Right.
And yes, maybe somebody might be waiting around at one point, but generally speaking, all the work is happening at the same time.
Yeah, if you stagger it a little, it can work really well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's because eventually what was happening is a little bit of analysis was happening, while a little bit of data extraction, transformation stuff was happening, and a little bit of, and the visualization would kind of come along. Again, depending on complexity, certain pieces of this were slower, but everything works out over time.
It does.
Somebody's busy this week, the next other person's busier the next week, and it all works out.
I think a purist might say if you're just working on data and processing data, but you're not actually delivering the visualization to the customer in that sprint, even if it's a little bit, a thin slice, then you're not really delivering value. You're waiting till the end of the next sprint.
Yeah.
So, but really, I mean, to your point, depends on what the appetite is.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because the leadership at the time where I fall into this bubble was, I was like, we can expand this bubble, because the visualization person on the team, basically, they're mocking up what a dashboard would look like.
They can do that anytime, ahead of time.
They don't need the data to do that.
That's right.
Or the analyst could provide a sample in CSV or something like that.
Sure.
Right? So the analyst can provide data that looks like what they're going to get in the form of an extract, and they're making it look good, but it's not you can't interact and drill down and stuff like that. The Viz person would do a tap dance and be like, well, you'll be able to drill down into this later, but right now you can't. And they'll show them, because a lot of leadership, which was our customers in that project, a lot of leadership looking at dashboards will say, I'd rather have this over there. Can you get this number instead of that number? Can you break this number into these two numbers? They'll give you things like that. Know what I mean?
Yeah.
But sometimes they'll have a question about the actual data itself. It's like, why does the trend look like this?
It'll be more, or more like, can this data be better presented in this way, kind of thing, right? Because we can't.
Yeah, I don't like the way you're presenting it. That happens a lot too. Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like the specific chart that you're presenting. You can get ahead with that by your person who knows the data, and or you're a person who does the visualizations should have relationship with the with the person that you're the customer, basically. Maybe not the person paying for the bills, but with the customer you're working with, and they should be able to get way ahead of that stuff in the discovery phase. So the point of this is I have two people on the team now who can help in discovery, and the developer in the team probably should be present as well, because they're going to be working with this data.
Exactly.
So that was the way that I structured the team when I had free reign. And I think I had 3 teams, 4 teams. I don't remember. I had a couple teams. I had a fairly large program I had at the time. Yeah, that lasted for a while. And then the product management, since the discovery portion was kind of forcibly kept separate, they wanted to take the visualization people, since they had the relationships, and they wanted them to join the discovery wing of the company in order to drive more sales, basically. And they were like, well, the product owner and the engineers can kind of stay together. And when we discover a data set that people need, we'll do the mock-up over here and present it to the customer. And then you consume the data, and you don't finish consuming your data until everything that potentially can power this dashboard is ready for the visualization person to come and pick up and build a dashboard. So we're not going to build a dashboard basically widget at a time. We're going to wait until the entire dashboard is ready to launch. And their thinking was, well, I described before how sometimes you had to wait, and one of the people had to wait. Their thinking was, if the engineers just get going with just a full list of all the air quotes requirements that it takes to build a dashboard, they'll know all the data they need to pull and model and flatten and whatever. And usually it's a lengthy process of doing all that. Yeah. So they can get to work doing that. The other person can prioritize it and help them through with the data. And the engineer and the analyst would kind of work together to kind of figure out the data. And they can build it. And when the data source is ready and published, they can do their demo to the Viz people. And the Viz people became the customers. And the Viz people could start on their method. And I was like, well, you just took, whereas discovery was kind of integrated into this whole thing, we were figuring out the requirements, and the customer was getting little, basically, pieces, widgets of their dashboard over time that were hard-coded, air quotes hard-coded, right? Started going live over time. So instead of that, now the customer went to a model where they get nothing for 3 months. And at the end of the 3 months, they get this big bang. And I was like, basically, first of all, you injected Waterfall back in. Yes. You made us back into Waterfall. That's where my example before, I was like, we had this little bubble of good Agile practices. So when we actually went to bring the data into our sprints, everything that happens in sprints was, we could predictably tell you, oh, this is 40 points. We do 10 points a sprint. It's going to take 4 sprints. And then we'd hit our number.
Sure.
But since we divorced discovery, part of discovery is knocking down risk. And part of the risk is this customer going to like this? So since we moved all that stuff to the end of the development process,
Yeah.
now all the risk is
backloaded.
Yeah, it's all if the customer didn't like what we did, we basically again. Everything failed.
Yeah.
Every single one of our sprints it's failed. So they moved to that model, and then unsurprisingly, they cut all the teams after after a couple sprints of
That's right.
Not delivering.
It must be the team's fault, right? That's happened. Absolutely.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah, they basically blame the teams. But again, if you're all gonna live and die together and be judged on the same metrics, then cool, we'll all do it together. But if you're gonna divide, if you're gonna have first class and second class citizens, then it's
never a good
that's
thing.
Not a good environment.
Yeah, I was in a similar sort of situation working with lots of data, a large program, and the need, for visual presentation was obviously paramount there as well. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that the teams did is we actually embedded into our team one of the members of a global UAT team, which was only 7 people, but these 7 people represented their own regions. And one of them was quite savvy technically and was very interested in learning about this stuff. So they would work together with the visualization person. And so when they went live, they took over essentially, and they would make the changes that were asked for by the business, not only in their own region or territory, but from other territories, because they knew what they were doing with the data. Yeah. Now, when it came to consuming a different data source, they would be lost. Mm-hmm. But that's fine, because the team can help them out and say, here's a different endpoint, etc. But that was wonderful, because they could be self-sufficient on those things where the team needn't spend a lot of time necessarily, after go live.
That again, it comes back to when you kick your engineers out of the discovery, and we're going to assume. I don't think it's an out of line assumption. We're going to assume that they're the smartest people in the room in this equation. When you kick the smartest people in the room out of the discovery sessions, a lot of smart questions don't get asked, and you potentially do not discover a lot of smart solutions to your customer, who potentially is in the room, to your customer's problems. So it was a short-sighted, bonehead decision based on what somebody thought might make them more efficient, without actually evidencing, let me try this and see if it's more efficient. So trying to separate the discovery in order to, air quotes, save them time was the wrong solution in that instance, because it ended up destroying the whole project.
That is short-term thinking, because they think people are made to be more efficient if we do it that way, but getting more output from them. Right?
Well, those product managers in that instance, they were stuck in the delivery mindset. They just couldn't break themselves out of output mindset of, we're delivering X features per sprint, rather than the customers are satisfied with the dashboards that we're making them. All of the evidence they were using to prove they were doing a good job or not was all wrong. The hindsight of that project. If I could go back and do it again, I would probably start on day one, rather than redoing all the teams, which honestly was the only reason the project held on that long. But rather than redoing all the teams, I would start at the leadership level, redoing all of the metrics that they judged the program by.
So you're going to say start at the leadership level and just basically change all that around. Bring people in who want change.
If I could have kicked them all out, that's a whole different discussion. Not a lot of people.
Different podcast.
Not a lot of people get to fire their management.
No, that's true. But it would be good. It would be good if that was the case.
Well, I think our point in this comes across loud and clear. Just fire all your management and do what you want.
Agile 3.0.
Okay, Agile 3.0. Look forward to our books and training.
Yes. Go to our website for certification training. That's right.
Go to agile-podcast.com. All right, that's the end. Woo!
That's the end. Subscribe and like.
Yeah, if you like this video, please subscribe, and I'll use the radio voice. This is my radio voice. My radio voice is starting to become Batman.